you for your compassion. Thank you. Joining me now, Liberal MP Jason Falinski and One Nation New South Wales leader Mark Latham. Welcome to you both. For a change of pace, let's talk about this incredible confrontation between Rand Paul and Joe Biden's nominee for Assistant Health Secretary Rachel Levine. This was at a confirmation hearing. Let's have a look.
Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field, and if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question. The question is a very specific one. Should minors be making these momentous decisions?
Look, that was pretty extraordinary confrontation. Mark, I want to start with you. How is it acceptable that someone who is going to be, or who's the nominee for the Assistant Health Secretary position in the United States, did not answer that question?
Well, it's completely unacceptable. These are big matters of public policy. Should minors, people that haven't got the vote up to the age of 16, not allowed legally to drive a car, how can they legally have the right to ignore the wishes of their parents and decide to change their gender? And Senator Rand Paul there gave examples from the United Kingdom of children as young as 3 receiving counselling about gender transition in so-called medical clinics in that country. Now, Sharri, I find this stuff to be sick. I find transgenderism to be an ideology in the political system that is pushing this approach beyond any element of biological science, any element of common sense, any element of decency, and certainly the rights of parents to be responsible guardians and in control of the big decisions of their children. So to see the nominee there, Levine, not answer any questions, the best she can do is to say, oh, if I get the job in the Biden administration, I'll come around to your office, Senator, we can have a talk about it. It's just simply appalling.
Jason, I think this is one area that parents, across the world really, really are terrified of, that their children without, their children who can't, as Mark and Rand Paul said, can't drink alcohol or can't drive cars, but somehow they're allowed to change their gender, before they're an adequate age to properly understand the consequences of this. Is this where we're headed in Australia as well, do you think?
Well, Sharri, can I say it's even worse than Mark and Senator Paul are revealing. Douglas Murray, in his book, The Madness of Crowds, points out that in the United Kingdom at the moment, parents can be informed by teachers that on the wishes of their students, they have changed their personal pronouns. And as Douglas points out, as Mr Murray points out, these are schools where you can't give a Panadol or an aspirin to a student without the consent and approval of parents. There's been recently a court case in the King's Court in the United Kingdom that has criticised the transgender clinics in the United Kingdom, which I think Senator Paul was quoting from there in that judgment, that makes the point that there are no safety mechanisms in place for people to undergo what are effectively life-changing treatments without being fully informed and fully understanding what they're doing. And as Mark correctly points out, as Senator Paul correctly points out, they're doing this at ages where they don't necessarily have all the capacity to be making life-changing decisions without their parents' involvement. It is, to go back to what Douglas Murray said, it is extraordinary that people are not allowed to give aspirins to children, but are allowed to change their personal pronouns without talking to their parents first.
Mark, the other thing about this is it's one of these issues that we always have to be so careful speaking about because, it's kind of the front line of the new political correctness. And if you say slightly the wrong thing, you're silenced. And we've seen with, related issues to this, it all relates to the cancelling of the mother, of the woman, this debate that's been taking off in the UK recently. And so many feminists have been cancelled.
Well, that's right, Sharri. But generally, I welcome the backwash and attacks of the left-wing offenderati, because it normally tells me that I'm correct. So I don't mind them attacking me, and I speak about these issues because there's a reality out there. There's a transgenderism ideology that's being pushed at many, many levels that wipes the rights of parents, that's harmful in many cases to the children themselves. Senator Paul there in that US confirmation hearing read out evidence from a young person who spoke of how they regretted the decision they made to change gender as a child, regretted it later in life. So, there's plenty of evidence to that effect. But the push is on here in Australia, and mention was made of what parents can be told and what they're not told. The New South Wales Teachers Federation, we're running an seemingly accredited professional development course in New South Wales, advising teachers if they find out anything about the gender and sexuality of their students, it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe in their assessment and advice to tell the parents. Now, I find that completely disgusting. It's happening in our schools here in Australia, where parents are being treated as second-class citizens, deliberately kept in the dark, and teachers are arrogantly assuming the mantle of being the parents and talking to the students about these things without informing the parents. So it's well out of control, and it needs legislative correction.
Look, Jason Falinski, I just want to ask you about another topic. Nicole Flint, she was the member for, or is the member for Boothby.
Still there.
She's still there. She is the member for Boothby in South Australia. Look, she's quitting politics. She says, or David Pemberthy in the Weekend Australian writes, because of the toxic culture of politics. As part of this, do you think she was supported enough in Canberra on her own side of politics when she was attacked by people like Mike Carlton, Get Up and the unions?
Well, the answer to that question, Sharri, is no, I don't think she was. And I'm actually talking about myself here. Nicole is a good friend, and I regret to say that I feel that I could have done more. Certainly when Mike Carlton, who's a constituent of mine, received his OAM, I wrote to Ben Morton and just said, how can this be, given some of the things that, the tweets that were of a nature of physically encouraging people to physically assault a woman because she was a Liberal. And how can it be that we award someone like that with an OAM? The fact of the matter remains that this is how I think too many people in our political discourse operate. If they can't win the argument, then they use fear and loathing to try and silence it. And that's what Twitter's about. I'm glad there are people like Mark Latham who take a cue that if he's getting them all riled up, that's a good sign. But I'm not sure that well, let me put it this way. No one should have to put up with that. Man, woman, no one should have to put up with it. But the stuff that Nicole put up with was just disgusting.
Yeah, and just to correct you there, Jason, although, what you said was admirable, apologising in a sense to Nicole Flint, just to correct you on that Mike Carlton tweet, what he actually said in that tweet was it was referring to a segment when she was on Q&A, she was sitting next to Jimmy Barnes, and Mike Carlton tweeted saying, I don't know how Jimmy Barnes doesn't get up and strangle that Liberal shill. So he was using
yes.
shill. So he was using, violent language rather than, I'm just correcting you, wasn't encouraging people to assault her. I don't think Mike Carlton watches this show, but just in case, correcting the abusive nature of his tweet. Quickly before
I'm sure that's an important distinction.
Yeah, Sharri, there's no way he's watching this show, given my reporting on him in the past. Mark Latham, just quickly before we have to go, another different topic again. Mike Pompeo wrote an amazing piece this week warning us about the dangerous nature of the Chinese laboratories in Wuhan. Do you think we still need to investigate this issue further after the WHO quite pathetic investigation?
Well, how do we, Sharri? I think the truth is we'll never really know the origins of the COVID virus. Most likely, if you can make a guess, in my assessment, it probably did come out of the wet markets, just as previous viruses had in China. But the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, the lack of any form of democracy or openness in China means that the Pompeo theory, perhaps intelligence of man-made viruses in laboratories, could also be valid. What we do know is that the United Nations and the World Health Organization seem completely and utterly powerless to get behind the veneer of Chinese obstruction and secrecy about this and establish the truth. Every person in the world has got the right to know the truth of what's happened here, because the whole international community has been very, very badly affected. But, China, in the bottom line, and I speak as someone who supported the relationship over decades, Sharri, China's gone bad on us in many, many ways. And it also flows into the debate about climate change. Anyone who thinks you're going to get transparency, what China's really doing with their carbon emissions, well, they're dreaming. So this is an ongoing problem, and I'm afraid generations to come will never really know the truth.
Yeah, not to mention all the people who've been disappeared as well. Mark Latham, Jason Falinski, sorry it was short tonight. My first interview went a bit longer. Thank you very much for your time.